Today, we'll discuss two questions that clients often ask. The first is about how to make your chatbot smart. The second is how to personalize emails, especially now with AI capabilities, and how to do it easily. Of course, it's clear that all of this can be done through programming, but with the new tools available, anyone can do it. So let's get started. Actually, a simpler method is creating a personalized email. But to understand how the tool itself works, in particular, I'll be talking about N8N. Why N8N? Because their implementation of AI capabilities is much simpler compared to others. The same goes for Zapier and our Power Automate that we use. I'll start with the chatbot. It's easier to implement. It's simple at first, but later it gets more complex. And we'll begin again. Here's what the N8N interface looks like. It's a system for automation, just like Make, Power Automate, and others. I'll call it Academy Chatbot for simplicity. The first version will be basic. It'll be a bit silly at first. You'll need to select a trigger as usual. In this case, we'll use a trigger for a chat. On chat message, there's nothing else to choose here. Then we connect the model. Here, we'll select AI agent, for example. I chose a model. It's important to specify it. There are many options here, beyond DeepSeek, Google, and Grok. I'm interested in OpenAI because I have an account. It will definitely ask for account connection here. It needs to be set up. The cheapest model right now is GPT 4.0, and everything I need is already ready. After the connection, we have a simple basic chatbot ready to go. For example, hello. And we see that it's just showing how it works. It thought about what to do, checked OpenAI, and gave us an answer. It's a bit limited though. For instance, if I ask it about the weather today, it says something like, I can't check real-time data. And its knowledge is basically limited to the model it's connected to. So it's not real-time, and nothing like that is possible here. It can only work with the data available up until its cutoff point. But we can connect some additional libraries, not libraries exactly, but rather making requests somewhere. In this case, I want to create a bot that simply searches through Excel and gives me answers based on my table. I tried Excel, but Google's table in N8N is a bit better implemented, so I'll search in it. I add Google Sheets, and it's already connected. Here, besides credentials, you can specify what it will do. For example, I'm going to upload the keys, the user table, and their DNL keys. These are real keys, but they're expired, so they have no value and they're all old. The advantage of Google's implementation here is that it searches automatically without needing instructions. If this were, for example, an online Excel sheet, I would need a VLOOKUP formula. You'd have to specify the field and where to search, so you'd need to give clear instructions for it to search. That's why I'm using Google Sheets here. It's simpler. What I'm interested in get rows, which document it is. This is my table. Which page? That's it. I've chosen it. I'll just add input here. This means chat input. I simply drag and drop it to the end. It accepts JavaScript syntax, and with drag and drop, it immediately understands the instruction. So when someone asks, it looks up the key based on their email. That should be enough. Let's go over it one more time. Now, let's see if he took a look. He's probably the only one who will tell me now that he didn't find anything. Yeah, and now I'll give him some kind of key. He even formulated his answer properly. Now I'll find the table, open it, and see what keys are there. Now, let me also point out one more thing for AI agents. If you want a conversation to happen, they shouldn't forget it. Right now, I'm going to paste this email to him, for example, and he won't understand anything because he'll forget the entire conversation history. He will think we're starting from scratch. But now I'll paste it and he'll say something like, maybe he'll figure it out. And he did figure it out. What's the trick? Sometimes he understood the incoming data, thought about it, and I simply found the relevant key in my table on Google. But it's really important, and if I were to ask any additional questions, he would perceive each new question as if it's starting from scratch. This is why it's very important for chatbots to have a memory buffer. In this case, it's very simple. I immediately implemented it in N8N. You can just plug it in, no need to configure anything, and it will automatically have buffering so that the conversation history is saved for a specific session. This way, you can ask follow-up questions back and forth. But in my scenario, it's very primitive. I just ask for the key, and he finds it and returns it to me. For more complex sequential questions and longer communication, without this feature, he will give incorrect answers. Let me check it now. See, it says it doesn't understand this, but if I add this buffer, it means it didn't find anything and doesn't know how to respond. However, if I add this buffer, we can, for example, revisit the story. It will go through it, think a little, and then it immediately returns what was created, which is pretty cool. Let me ask again. Ideally, there should be a buffer that will return what we initially wrote. This is what buffering is for. Next, for a smarter bot, we will be creating and converting data into vectors because there are two types of search. One is semantic search, meaning we need to configure the database for semantic search. The second search is through vectors. What happens is it simply takes the data from the string, aggregates it into an array, and stores it in a table. Here's a simple basic bot that can find things, and we can change the data sources. It will look through them. What's smart here are the AI agents that use the AI model. By the way, people often write in a structured format, meaning a specific format. If we want a specific instruction, we can simply add a system message and it will send it along with your message, like in a prompt that you probably all use. For example, it could be something like your helpful assistant. You can also restrict it, like preventing it from answering questions about, I don't know, something people often joke about, like when bots are asked to write baking instructions and they just start doing it. So you can limit it to respond only with specific instructions and nothing else presented in plain text. It could be structured like this: receive user's message, check for relevance, Google Maps for Power BI. If off topic, provide a polite refusal. This prompt is sent secretly along with the chat input. Then, when the model processes it, it can follow instructions like searching here or there. For a simple bot, this works fine. But we'll be making a smarter bot. This is the next step. Now, let's step away from bots for a moment and focus on another use case: creating a personal email. We'll look at how we can use different tools before diving into building a vector database, which is a bit more complex but interesting. Now, I'll hit save. Here we are creating a new workflow, and our task is to send a personalized email with a high degree of customization, exactly the way we like it, with a fully custom message. Let's start by selecting a manual trigger. Any trigger can be used here. Let me show you the available triggers. For example, there could be a webhook triggered when a record is created in another database, or it could be for processing form submissions, and so on. So, like many other systems, any trigger can fit here. In this case, we are interested in a manual start. What are we going to do? We will retrieve a list of people, their data, and then process it. Of course, we can connect to a table. For simplicity, I connected to HubSpot because Dynamics has limited connectors only for accounts. You would need to register an application for that. The connectors here are somewhat weak, but they've done a good job for some of them. So I'll use HubSpot. Now, what we're going to do is fetch get many contacts. I'll specify that I want to get 5 for starters. I have the connector set up. If I didn't, I would need to create it, but everything is configured here. I click on the test and it pulls up 5 contacts. It just goes through the list. What are we interested in? I see the company name here, the name. In this case, we want to send an email depending on their industry. So we need to know what industry they belong to, and then we'll understand who they are and craft the right message for them. In this case, I'll need additional parameters. What we need is the ID, because the next step will require it. Now, let's see what it will include, because when I add these, I notice that it removes some other parameters. Let's check what's here. We have the name, the associated company. I don't see the email here. In HubSpot, the email is the ID. Here we have the ID. Okay, I'll also add the last name, which seems to be there. This should be enough. Let's move to the next step. To find the industry, as it's stored in HubSpot, we need to check the companies. So we go back and create the next step. And here I want to show that there are a lot of different steps, but we can also create a lot of handlers. Here I could add a bot that does something, I don't know, like gathering data from the web. Then the next step, I could create another bot that would handle data or enrichment, finding information from other sources. So a lot of bots can be connected here, each performing its own functions and passing the results to the next step. What makes this situation unique? I understand that everyone else will catch up, like Zapier, Microsoft, and Make. Their biggest disadvantage is that you often need to implement things with code. I'm not sure what the up-to-date situations are, but if you look at N8N, it's implemented most conveniently with what's called LangChain. Bots can essentially make decisions on which tools to use. But we'll get to that in a bit. For now, we're still getting the company ID. So we want to get the company from the from list by ID. All I'm doing is dropping the related company ID. I just take it and drop it here. It immediately switches the expression to JSON and gives me the ID. I'll check to make sure the step works. Table. In the end, it works and gets it, but it retrieves too many parameters. The next step will be to decide what we want to do here. We want to gather everything into one email so it gets generated for us. Right now, we're connecting the bot AI agent. Again, we need to specify the model and we choose the model. It's OpenAI again, and the cheapest option works for us. What's the difference here? It's in the quantity. But aside from that, let's take a look. I'll show you. There are different models with different tasks like audio processing. There are a lot of GPT-based models. Some have more up-to-date information and others are older. But you should definitely check the price because this 4.0 mini model is the cheapest in terms of token cost, just a few cents. If you choose the wrong model, it might cost you $10 to $15 for 1 million tokens, while this one only costs about 15 cents. They seem to support a more mainstream model. There are also the latest models, but they cost much more. However, that's not necessary. The difference lies in how many tokens are used for processing and the size of the library, how it was trained, and how many parameters it has. This is our input. What we see from the different steps is that we see this named contacts. Then we need to decide what interests us. We've connected the model. Now we'll give instructions on what we want it to do. In this case, I'll just write, you will write an introduction email. I'll insert their industry parameters, and next we can just add an instruction. Here, we'll add the email, so we'll take the @ symbol and the email along with the first name. We gather contacts and companies. In the agent, we write, let's just click to run it and get 5 emails, 5 companies. Here, we have our contacts and companies as input. According to the instructions, I ask the agent to, let's expand it, email to HubSpot first name. The company name goes here, and in this case, if I'm not mistaken, these are test data, so HubSpot is used. I also pull the industry from the company as there's one of the fields, industries. After that, I ask it to look up in the Google table where different personas are listed. What it generates is an email for Maria, who works at HubSpot, using the industry to determine the persona from the Google table and write an introduction email. It was enough for me to just write Google table, and it understands that it needs to use this tool, which I already showed you. The contents of the table don't need to be structured at all. For example, here I have personas like real estate agents, property managers. It describes the job to be done, which in this case explains how they use our systems. So I want to make this email an introduction while also saying something like, here's how people in your industry are using our tool. The bot's task is to find someone in that industry and describe how that person could use our tool. I'm going back and pressing play, and we can see that it's now starting to process each of these contacts. The prompt looks into our Google Sheet and will proceed down the chain. The next step is that I want it to generate a beautiful HTML email. Here, I just added a template that I generated. I click Test Step and it shows me how it looks. It continues with some static content that I didn't bother changing, and the dynamic part is the entire body. I see that it included some garbage text. This is one of the drawbacks. Sometimes, even when you instruct it to remove unnecessary text, it may still include it. So when you try it, you'll see that some tweaking is necessary to make it look beautiful and not include extra text. It might also hallucinate and add its own words. The more complex the text and task, the higher the chance that it will deviate from the standard. For example, I initially tried to generate a complete HTML email. It can do this, but the result will be inconsistent. Sometimes the HTML will appear in one form and other times in another. It will constantly vary the elements, so you won't get a consistent template. However, if you want a stable template, the current step is simply to load the HTML text, insert the variables you want from the previous output into the body, and it will consistently generate content inside your HTML email. The next step is creating a draft. All that's done is adding the connector to Outlook. I asked it to create a draft with the subject element test message. I insert it, and it's essential to specify the message type as HTML. Otherwise, it defaults to text. Then I click test, and it generated 5 outputs. Now, I'll show you my outbox drafts. Here it is. There's some tweaking needed, and here we have Sebastian and Henry. So sometimes you need to go through it and explain what shouldn't be included. In general, when your prompt is more polished, the results will be much more stable, with deviations happening very rarely. I'll just add again that you can create additional agents that can process this data and convert it into different outputs. Next, what I wanted to do was create a more sophisticated bot. For clients, it's very common for them to ask for a smart bot that can consistently provide accurate answers to questions asked online. The biggest challenge here is data acquisition. Data can be exported, and I'll show you one of the examples. The biggest problem is exporting existing data. For example, in our case, communication happens through chat. For those familiar with Google Maps, you'll notice that chat conversations are often sent via email afterward. Therefore, the entire chat history is already available somewhere for our clients. It could be email correspondence, chat messages, or stored in some database. It could also include, I don't know, maybe phone calls, again, anything. Then we need to create this knowledge base. In this case, I export the last 200 emails received from Chatra. Here, the sender is shown because it contains all the message data. After that, I ask the AI to remove the HTML formatting. There are other methods as well, but this was the simplest integration. There are different ways to remove HTML and extract only what's needed, such as using Markdown. Later, I asked the system to process and extract the client's question, removing our agent's responses so that it's structured in a way that doesn't output, for example, 5 emails with their contents. The system processes and discards unnecessary parts, and I further process it. I remove any remaining irrelevant content or junk. At this point, we have a more structured text. Who said what, but there's still some unnecessary data. Therefore, I asked the system to remove the extra information, extract the questions and answers, and then structure it. The output should be a custom question, agent answer, and search tag. After that, I'll show what it can do. Let's press play, and it will process those 5 messages. I'll show you after processing these 5. We have a customer question. Does your visual support direct export to Power BI? There was an answer, and here we automatically apply tags to make it easier for semantic search later on. Next, there's processing. I also do different summarizations there, so it's not necessarily required. And in the output, all I want to get is to merge the two here. I just want it not to summarize this part. I just want the description so that it's easier to search for the vector. It ends up summarizing the first, the second, and the third answers. And we get, on one side, we have the summary, and on the other side, the raw data. Here, I just want to combine them, and at the output, I want to get it in Excel. I export everything to Excel. It processed it here. I click download. I'll just show you how it processed everything. The next step is we'll create a vector for this table. As you can see, it took everything, exported it, and structured it. To create the vector, the simplest way was to connect an external service. It could have been Azure, but I connected through a database called Supabase. I took that Excel file, simply dropped it into this database, and now you see the same thing. Custom question, agent answer, search, and then there's a summary. Next, I had to create a separate format for the vector, which means a separate column with a vector type where the size depends on the model. I believe it's 1035 for the character length. Then there's metadata, which is another part where the JSON is stored. This will be for population, so this is created later when you form the vector from your database. Right now, we are going backward. What are we doing here? We are gathering all the data. In this case, I'm asking him to export all 205 rows. So he just didn't export the entire table that was there. And then what I was trying to do here is I generate the vector for that table. So what he does is take the input data and the output. All I do is drop the row ID, and then he extracts everything I need from that JSON format. Then he starts. What's important here is to integrate embedding through OpenAI, after which, once your vector is ready, you get a smarter bot. Let me switch over here. Now, when the data source needs to be connected, it's no longer a table. It's the same chat, but now we're connecting a vector instead, and we get a smarter bot. So I open it and can ask a variety of different questions. Now I'll ask. As you can see, in this case, he didn't even look at the vector because he understood that the question was simple and didn't need any searching. Now, let me take a more complex question from my big knowledge base. I want him to answer more specifically. Now, he'll check the vector and start searching. Well, some questions didn't have an answer, so he says, I will escalate. This means that the knowledge base, to cover different scenarios, can't always just rely on email correspondence. You'll need to add some additional descriptions, additional scenarios, cases. The more information it contains, the better. In this case, as you can see, I only exported 200 emails, and apparently it wasn't enough. It turns out that the vector database tries to find more based on matching. So, if there are questions and descriptions, semantic search is not enabled here. It can also be connected. Semantic search is more like Google's, where it searches for similarities in meaning. In this case, for a knowledge base, it's necessary to connect both options to make it faster and more effective in finding answers from the available data. By the way, I'd like to show you that, for example, Claude does a great job generating HTML. It's well structured. This is because sometimes I've seen OpenAI where the formatting often gets messed up. It feels like OpenAI is better trained for coding, particularly as code. Just for fun, we've started using it to generate mockups for various interfaces as well, and it works really well. If you need something drawn or prototyped, you can check it out. Okay, thanks everyone.